The Pokedex has some pretty terrifying Pokemon. From a Pokemon that will beat you senselessly to one that can accidentally paralyze its opponents, these are the scariest Pokedex entries. Let's begin with the newer Pokemon, Hattrem. Now, the newer generations of Pokemon are introducing some quite cute looking Pokemon, and Hattrem matches this description. A cute little psychic type with a lovely little hat. However, this Pokemon's Pokedex entry from Pokemon Violet will make you think twice about having it on your team. The moment this Pokemon finds someone who is emitting strong emotions, it will pummel them senseless with its braids to silence them. So yeah, if you're too happy around this Pokemon, it's gonna beat you until you can't speak. I am now slightly more terrified about using this Pokemon. However, our next Pokemon is far more violent. Sliggoo is a weird Pokemon. A snail who is also a dragon, but also historically a steel type. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. However, its Pokedex entry will make this far creepier. Sliggoo is a snail, and one thing snails are known for is the mucus they secrete as they move around. It's gross, slimy, but mostly harmless, unlike in Sliggoo's Pokedex entry from Pokemon X. It drives away opponents by excreting a sticky liquid that can dissolve anything. Its eyes devolve, so it can't see anything. So in other words, if this Pokemon were to accidentally slide its way over a newborn baby, that baby would be dissolved by its acidic mucus. Certainly makes me a bit more terrified of snails, but not quite as terrified as our next Pokemon makes me with sleeping. When you think of Pokemon causing nightmares, you would instantly think of Darkrai. However, Musharna is just as dangerous when it comes to this. Musharna was a Pokemon introduced in Generation 5 and was exploited in order to try and provide a cleaner energy source with its Dream Mist. I just hope they didn't mess with it too much while it was sleeping, as according to Musharna's Pokedex entry in Pokemon Sword, this can have horrendous side effects. When dark mist emanates from its body, don't get too near. If you do, your nightmares will become reality. I am now far less terrified of Darkrai and much more terrified of this oversized pink marshmallow. So far, all of these Pokemon have been quite cute, so let's move on to a Pokemon that certainly isn't. Being stuck in the desert can be terrifying. No, sorry, I mean desert, not dessert. Being stuck in a cake sounds lovely. However, being stuck in a barren, sandy wasteland sounds considerably worse, especially if Cacturne was around. Cacturne is a nocturnal cactus Pokemon who has some pretty terrifying characteristics, according to its Pokedex entry from Omega Ruby. During the daytime, Cacturne remains unmoving so that it does not lose any moisture to the harsh desert sun. The Pokemon becomes very active at night when the temperature drops. I think it's safe to say that I am never going to a desert anytime soon, although I might pop out and get myself a nice dessert to cope with the nightmares I am now going to have. Let's move on to another Pokemon that really fits this time of year. In Generation 6, we were introduced to not one but two evolutionary lines of creepy ghost and grass types with terrifying Pokedex entries. However, since it's the month of Halloween, let's focus on Gourgeist, a pumpkin-based Pokemon who is known for its creepy Pokedex entries, especially its Pokedex entry in Pokemon Y. It enwraps its prey in its hair like arms. It sings joyfully as it observes the suffering of its prey. So a cute pumpkin that likes watching me suffer. If it wasn't for the pumpkin, I would think this Pokedex entry is about my ex-girlfriend. But speaking of girls, let's talk about our waifu Pokemon next. One Pokemon that is creepily feminine is the waifu Pokemon Serena. Why they felt the need to make a plant into a waifu Pokemon is far from my understanding. However, let's talk about one of this Pokemon's Pokedex entries, which really showcases what this Pokemon is most known for, stomping. Serena's Pokedex entry from Pokemon Shield really makes you terrified to find yourself on the receiving end of one of these kicks. A kick from the hardened tips of this Pokemon's legs leave a wound in the opponent's body and a soul that will never heal. This is definitely my ex-girlfriend. Leaving a wound in my soul? Anyway, let's move on to a Pokemon that does not quite cause as much existential dread. Dugtrio is an adorable Pokemon. When you consider that most of its Pokedex entries simply call it a triplet Diglett, it really is just three Diglets who all look exactly the same. However, while Diglett's Pokedex entry describes it as a massive introvert, Dugtrios are far more terrifying. So let's look at Dugtrio's Pokedex entry from Red and Blue. A team of Diglett triplets. It triggers huge earthquakes by burrowing 60 miles underground. So next time you're hit by an earthquake, make sure you remember it's probably just Diglets burrowing underground at immense speeds. But let's move on to another Generation 1 Pokemon with a far more sinister Pokedex entry. One of my favorite ghost-type Pokemon is Haunter. Granted, my favorite is its evolution, but I found Haunter's Pokedex entry to be both disgusting and terrifying. If I showed you an image of Haunter, what would you say its biggest feature is? Perhaps its spiky head shape, its claw-like hands, or the correct answer, its tongue. Haunter is known to lick countless enemies within the anime, but when you know what this actually means, you will be far more concerned. According to Haunter's Pokedex entry in Pokemon Yellow, by licking it saps the victim's life. It causes shaking that won't stop until the victim's demise. Yeah, I think whenever a Haunter is nearby, having an ice cream on hand probably isn't the worst idea. But now, let's move into one of the best Dark-type Pokemon ever introduced. I love puppies, and I'm sure there are not many people out there who would disagree with me. And I'm fairly certain that is why Houndour and Houndoom are are as popular as they now are. Since these Pokemon are some of the first Dark-type Pokemon ever introduced, they had to have a Pokedex entry fitting for this new type introduced to the game. And that terrifying Dark typing really comes through with its Pokedex entry from Pokemon Gold. If you are burned by the flames it shoots from its mouth, the pain will never go away. I think at this point I would beg someone to put me out of my misery, but sometimes that isn't as easy. I mean, just ask our next Pokemon. Bayonet is in a state of constant suffering, from which the Pokemon will seemingly never be free. Bayonet is another interesting ghost type who comes with a horrendous backstory, especially when you consider a lot of its Pokedex entries, especially from Pokemon Ultra Sun. It's a stuffed toy that was thrown away and became possessed, ever searching for the one who threw it away so it can exact its revenge. Yikes. What do you think? What was the scariest Pokedex entry on this list? Let me know down below and let me know if you want to see a part 2.